Have you ever felt trapped in your own thoughts? Like your mind is stuck on repeat, either replaying the past or spiraling into what-ifs about the future? You're not alone. These loops, whether they sound like self-blame or worst-case scenarios, aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're often the echoes of past pain. Rumination and obsession might look similar on the surface, but they come from different emotional roots and impact us in distinct ways. Knowing the difference isn't just helpful, it's healing. Because when we begin to understand the language of our thoughts, we can meet ourselves with compassion instead of confusion, and finally begin to soften the patterns that keep us stuck. Why can't I stop thinking about it or of someone? Why do I always assume the worst is going to happen? If you've ever found yourself stuck in loops of overthinking, caught in a mental maze, or catastrophizing the future, this might help you feel seen. You're not crazy, you're not broken. You're likely protecting yourself the best way you know how, with your mind. What many people don't realize is that these patterns have names, and understanding them is often the first step toward healing. They're called rumination and obsession, and they show up a lot in people with unhealed trauma, especially in relationships. The word rumination comes from the Latin ruminare, meaning to chew over or to turn over in the mind, derived from rumen, meaning throat or gullet. It originally referred to the process of animals like cows chewing cud, which was later extended metaphorically to describe deep or repetitive thinking. The term and its psychological sense was popularized and formally defined by psychologist Susan Nolan Huxheimer in the late 1980s and early 1990s. It's like chewing the same thoughts over and over again, mentally stuck on a loop that never fully resolves. You think about the argument that happened 5 years ago, the words you should have said, or why someone treated you the way they did. You replay it endlessly, hoping for clarity, but instead of answers, you just feel more exhausted, more stuck, and somehow more at fault. Rumination tends to focus on the past. Questions like, why did this happen? What did I do wrong? How could I have prevented it? You may not even realize it, but this isn't just thinking, it's a survival response. When we've experienced emotional wounds, especially in childhood or in attachment-based trauma, the brain often tries to make sense of the pain by replaying it. But instead of healing, we get caught in self-blame and over-analysis. And here's the painful part. It can feel like growth, but it's really just a mental holding pattern. Rumination often masquerades as reflection. Inspired by the work of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, some therapists note that trauma-related rumination can become self-punishment, disguised as insight. You might think, I'm just being self-aware, or I'm trying to understand what happened. But without forward movement or compassion, it becomes a cycle of self-blame that keeps you stuck in the past. On the other side of the timeline is obsession. Where rumination focuses on what has happened, obsession fixates on what might happen. It's the flood of what-if questions that hit you out of nowhere. What if they leave me? What if I mess this up? What if I'm not enough? Obsession feels like your mind is constantly warning you of danger, even when everything seems okay. It can feel intrusive, like a voice you didn't invite in, repeating fear-based thoughts that don't align with the logical part of you. That's because obsession is often rooted in anxiety and hypervigilance, which are direct consequences of trauma. Especially if your safety, emotional or physical, was ever threatened, your nervous system may have learned to always scan for danger, even in safe situations. It's like living with an alarm system that never shuts off. In Unwinding Anxiety, Dr. Judson Brewer explains that the brain holds onto old fear patterns, especially when safety wasn't a given. It learns to stay on high alert even when the danger is long gone. That on-edge feeling? That's your trauma brain saying, don't relax, it's not safe to trust. In relationships, both rumination and obsession can wreak havoc. Maybe you're stuck thinking about something a partner said weeks ago. You analyze every word, searching for hidden meaning or proof that they don't love you. Or maybe you're constantly imagining worst-case scenarios, convinced they'll cheat, abandon you, or stop caring, even if they've given no reason to think so. You might find yourself rereading texts, replaying conversations, rehearsing confrontations that haven't even happened, checking their social media more than you'd like to admit, trying to prevent pain that feels inevitable, even when nothing bad is happening. Sound familiar? That's not weakness. That's your trauma whispering that love isn't safe, or lasting, or real. Here's something that might surprise you. Both rumination and obsession are attempts to protect you. They may seem like they're hurting you, and in some ways they do, but their original intention was survival. Rumination tries to keep you safe by helping you avoid future mistakes. Obsession tries to control the uncontrollable so that you won't be caught off guard again. They're like old coping tools from a younger version of you, still trying to keep you safe from what hurt back then. But now, these strategies may be outdated. They may be keeping you out of the present moment, out of connection, out of peace, out of growth. Sometimes, what we call thinking is actually a trauma loop in disguise. Research into something called perseverative cognition shows that both worry and rumination can elevate stress in our bodies, raising heart rate, increasing cortisol, and impacting our health. But more than that, they quietly keep us trapped in pain, either from the past or the imagined future. Let's break it down gently. Rumination is past-focused. It sounds like, why did that happen? It can feel like you're trying to understand, but often it's a loop of shame, regret, and sadness. It may feel intentional, like you're doing something helpful, but it keeps you dwelling without moving forward. At its core, it's often driven by a need to understand or to blame yourself. Psychologists call this cognitive fusion, getting entangled with your thoughts as if they are truth. Obsession, on the other hand, is future-focused. It whispers, what if this happens? It doesn't feel helpful. It feels intrusive, alien, and unwanted. The emotional tone is urgent, anxious, even panicked. The behaviors that follow tend to be avoidance or compulsions, often in an attempt to prevent catastrophe. This pattern is often tied to trauma-based hypervigilance, where the brain learned long ago that safety was unpredictable, so it now scans constantly for danger. The truth is, both are trauma loops. One keeps you stuck in what was, the other traps you in what might be. Neither are your fault. They are adaptations, your brain's way of trying to protect you. But once we bring compassion and awareness to these patterns, healing becomes possible. You can begin to untangle from the past and find your footing in the now. These thought patterns don't appear out of nowhere. For many, they are scars left behind by trauma. Rumination may reflect unresolved shame, guilt, or helplessness. When trauma goes unhealed, rumination often shows up as replaying past events. What went wrong? Why did they hurt me? Self-blame loops. It's my fault. I'm unworthy. Meanwhile, obsession might look like intrusive fears. They'll leave. I'll be betrayed. Compulsive checking. Texts, social media, seeking reassurance. Both keep us trapped in old pain, sabotaging new connections. Obsession often stems from broken trust, betrayal, or an internalized belief that the world and people aren't safe. For people with complex PTSD, both patterns can coexist. You might ruminate about being mistreated in the past while obsessively trying to prevent being hurt again in the future. Trauma fractures our sense of time. It pulls us back to pain and pushes us into fear. It tells us that stillness isn't safe, so our thoughts keep running. In intimate relationships, these patterns can quietly sabotage connection. Rumination might sound like, I shouldn't have said that. They're probably upset with me. I always ruin things. What's wrong with me? This creates emotional distance, distrust of one's own worth, and fear of closeness. Obsession might look like, endless checking of your partner's tone, texts, body language, fearing abandonment to the point of controlling or withdrawing, feeling like you can't relax, like you're always bracing for betrayal. In relationships, these trauma loops create emotional intensity, explosive reactions to small triggers, communication breakdowns, withdrawal or attacking when overwhelmed, self-fulfilling prophecies. I knew you'd leave, pushing partners away. Trust erosion. Hypervigilance that sees danger where there is safety, 𝑾𝑰𝑻𝑯. Healing begins not by fixing your mind, but by understanding it. Start by asking, is this a past-based loop rumination or a future-based one obsession? Am I trying to understand or trying to prevent? Is this thought helping me grow or keeping me stuck? Once you identify the loop, you can gently interrupt it. For rumination, try Dr. Nolan Hoeksema's scheduled worry time. Set a 10-minute timer. Practice mindful awareness when the loop begins. Reframe, is this thought based in fact or fear? Offer yourself compassion. I did the best I could with what I knew then. For obsession, use grounding techniques to return to your body. Name 3 things you see, hear, feel right now. Practice cognitive diffusion. I'm having the thought that. Use exposure response prevention, ERP, for specific fears. Gently challenge avoidance behaviors. Here are trauma-informed steps that work. Name the loop. This is rumination, not introspection. This is obsession, not intuition. Ground yourself. Sensory checks. What can I see, hear, feel right now? Breath or body awareness to bring you back to safety. Offer compassion. No wonder I'm ruminating. I was hurt. This fear makes sense, but I'm here now and I'm safe. Engage with intention. For rumination, schedule a 10-minute worry period, then shift to gratitude or action. For obsession, cognitive diffusion. I'm having the thought that, or gentle exposure, ERP. Metacognitive therapy, pioneered by Adrian Wells, teaches noticing thoughts instead of engaging them, and has strong research backing for both rumination and worry. So what do? First, name it without shame. When you notice yourself spiraling into old thoughts, say gently, that's a rumination loop, or this is obsession, not intuition. The goal isn't to stop the thought right away. It's to create a little space between you and the thought. Second, ground yourself in the present. Use mindfulness tools like breath work, sensory check-ins, what do I see, hear, feel, smell, or even physically grounding activities like walking barefoot or holding a cold object. Your nervous system needs to feel that you're safe right now. Third, compassion over control. Instead of trying to silence the thoughts, try responding with kindness. No wonder I'm thinking this. I've been hurt before. This fear makes sense, but it's not in charge anymore. Your brain isn't your enemy. It's just confused about what safety looks like. Fourth, seek support that's trauma-informed with a licensed medical professional. Therapies like EMDR, somatic work, internal family systems, IFS, or exposure and response prevention, ERP, can help rewire those mental patterns at the root. And sometimes just naming these patterns with a safe person can be deeply healing. And finally, be curious, not critical. Ask yourself, is this thought helping me move forward or keeping me stuck? What would it feel like to respond differently this time? What part of me still believes that love equals danger? Healing also grows through mindfulness, noticing thoughts without fusing with them. Boundaries, saying this fear is mine to heal instead of projecting. Community, support groups like ACA to break isolation. Healing isn't about silencing your mind, It's about returning to the truth. Your past pain does not get to veto your present peace. Your fears are not forecasts, and you are so much more than your survival patterns. You are a whole human learning to trust again. And that begins when your mind finally learns you're safe to grow, safe to feel, safe to heal. One breath, one thought, one day at a time. If you found this video helpful, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and don't forget to like and subscribe.